What actually is ignorance? Hello, this is Shores of Infinity with your host Chris, and today I want to examine with you the question, what is ignorance? I'm sure people have called you stupid or you them. Often people, especially people on the spiritual path, get upset about the stupidity of humanity as a whole. Another word for stupidity is ignorance. But ignorance actually means not knowing. And someone who has examined this very closely was Sri Aurobindo. So let's have a look. If you concentrate on one tiny aspect and ignore the whole, this is ignorance. If you create a closed system, ignoring that it's actually part of an infinite large system, it creates ignorance. Ignorance is a concentration on an aspect and treating it as if it were the whole or the most important. And this is true both for ignorance as a whole, ignorance of humanity, for example, or ignorance of creation, as well as the ignorance of the individual, which is called the ego. Sri Aurobindo writes, the necessity of centralization around the ego continues until there is no longer need of any such device or contrivance. So it means that the ego and this ignorance is necessary up to a certain point until when it is not necessary anymore. After thinking about for years so how to explain it in very, very simple terms, I'm going to explain in this and the next video the last 4 chapters of Book 2 of the Life Divine. I know some of you love Sri Aurobindo and some of you don't, because he is overcomplicating things with his beautiful language. Yet the book is very good. I had a chat with Tony Parsons once, and he said, according to his experience, what Sri Aurobindo talks about, I mean, he didn't know what he talked about, but I summarized it for him, cannot be. It's just imagination. But I'm open, I always have been, and am staying open to that Sri Aurobindo and Meher Baba really experienced what they were writing about. And since I have had 600 and 700 experiences on the Hawkins scale, I can follow them more clearly. And let's say with the Hawkins scale, everything below 200 is ignorance and also leads to evil or can lead to evil, as we see in the later 2 chapters. So I'm summarizing here in very simple terms the 2 chapters, the boundaries of the ignorance and the origin of the ignorance. Chapter 11 and 12 of Book 2 of the Life Divine. Seriously, it took me about 1 year to find out how to summarize it in simple terms. Because this is the linchpin here. What about ignorance? Why do we need this ignorance and evil stuff? Why can't people just be nice? Why do they have to be assholes, exploiting others, killing others, lying to others, torturing others? Why? Why can't the world just be nice and harmonious and peaceful? The answer is because of ignorance. And ignorance is necessary for some time, to some degree, until some point of development. With Sri Aurobindo, it's always about evolution and involution. I've been discussing with a friend lately about the experience of evolution and involution. This is a theoretical concept until you have experienced it. You can experience actually cosmic evolution and involution. But you need a lot of letting go for that, a lot of surrender and a lot of compassion. Otherwise, you just get upset and say everyone is stupid. Now, what is the point where the ego and the ignorance become unnecessary? It is the emergence of intuition, and what Sri Aurobindo calls the true self, the spiritual being, which he calls in other books the psychic being. The psychic being emerges in second tier of spiral dynamics. In Hawkins scale 400 plus, it starts to emerge until 700. This is the goal. This is the true goal of enlightenment, is to get out of this ignorance and then to develop the psychic being. What some people have called the true self. Only it is not a self. It is a thing which you have access to, which everyone has access to. It's not an individual thing anymore. So you have to relinquish individuality, which is ego. Yeah? Individuality equals ego, equals concentration, equals a narrowing of perspective instead of a holistic one. What we're looking for here is a unified field theory, but not of physics, but of spirituality. Until this happens, everything is being held together by this concentration of ego equals ignorance. Once the true self, the spiritual being, the psychic being emerges with the help of intuition and so on, and grace, this becomes the true wheel in motion of that which holds all together, the center and the circumference, which reminds us of Bernadette Roberts, of course. She described everything in this circular way. What is necessary is just to give up this notion that our waking, usual day-to-day consciousness is something very valuable, which is representing an important truth. It is representing a kind of truth, but it is very limited and distorted and narrow. So what we need is an opening, a surrender to that reality is much more than what we know so far, which for some people is too scary, which again is a result of ignorance, a result of the inconscient and the subconscient. The concealed consciousness, that's the other thing with Sri Aurobindo, yeah? The inconscient, the subconscious, even the ignorance and the evil is in itself, deep inside, down below, a concealed consciousness. An involuted consciousness that then wants to evolve again to something even more brilliant, more astounding. The concealed self and consciousness is our real and whole being, of which the outer part is only a phenomenon, a selective formation for a surface use. Once you get used to Sri Aurobindo's language, it's amazing, it's great, it's such a beautiful language, but it's complicated, yeah? So he says, the concealed, the true self, the psychic being is our true nature, our true being, and the outer part, the ego, is just a selective formation for surface use. It's like Jed McKenna says, it's like the meat suit. It's made for interaction and protection. We've seen this in previous chapters. It's actually a form of protection. The ego is a form of protection. And not only physical protection, but also psychological and energetical protection against radiation, cosmic radiation, for example. So the ego will not disappear, it's just not in the driver's seat anymore. It will still have a function, but just not the most important function. So somehow we have to bring the ignorance to be interested in knowledge, in its opposite. Ignorance is the opposite of knowledge, of true knowledge, not theoretical, made-up knowledge. And although it's actually not interested in it, it's more interested in what we call in psychology confirmation bias. Yeah, ignorance wants to just confirm what it already knows, like the Dunning-Kruger effect. So we have to get this thing to be interested in real knowledge, truth. Luckily, there's something inside us that wants to know the truth. And it's a deeper thing than the ego and a more powerful thing once you start using it. If you start using your intuition more and more and more, it will replace the predominance of the ego. Now these are the boundaries of the ego. Now let's look at the origin. The origin is separation. Separation of the whole in different parts and aspects and beings. The illusion of the multitude is what causes the ignorance, is the origin of ignorance. Unfortunately, it is necessary. You can't have the whole world and the whole creation without the ignorance. If the divine knows its own game, then it doesn't work. So it has to create ignorance. It has to blind itself to make the world, the creation, possible. It is a play, a lila. Out of the absolute potentiality comes a creation which is not potential anymore, but enacted, manifest, real. Out of the immaterial, the material is created. But this can only be done with ignorance. Ignorance maintains the illusion, the Maya, maintains the illusion of action happening, of time happening, of stuff happening, instead of just passively being. Ignorance is not an aspect of the divine, it's a trick of the divine. Ignorance can only intervene, as Sri Aurobindo explains. It makes things partial and relative instead of absolute and unified. It makes all the different souls think they're separate individual beings, while in actual fact they're one being. This psychic being is just one being that we have access to because we're part of it. Every one of us. We're not sitting in one boat. We're all one being. All human beings are one being. That is why it is important that not only one person or one soul is enlightened, but everyone. It's not enough to retreat and sit in a cave or in a hut somewhere and do the things by yourself. You're not separate from the rest of humanity. It's one thing. To say, fuck society, I'm doing this on my own, I don't care about others, is also ignorance. Everything that is limiting is ignorance. And the mind too, not that which Sri Aurobindo calls the higher mind, or the true reason or something like this, yeah? But the normal mind, or normal thinking apparatus, is also part of ignorance. It's part of the problem, I'm sorry to say. You cannot think your way out of this conundrum. And to call others stupid is also again a separation, an individuation, building walls, protection. It's ignorance and ego. Ignorance is inbuilt into nature and is inbuilt into us. And this inbuiltness he calls an obscure miracle of the universe, Maya. But Maya is not ignorance. Maya uses ignorance. Our ego is ignorance. Our mind is ignorance. Our psychic being is not ignorance. That's knowledge and consciousness. Direct, immediate knowledge, which we have been talking about in the previous chapter, knowledge by identity. So far, probably Tony Parsons could agree, because he's also talking about this concentration, which makes a fold in reality and makes things appear separate and individual and real. He probably would agree with Sri Aurobindo so far. Only what he doesn't agree with is that there is an evolution and that there is something that we could call the divine, some sort of being thingy, an intelligence or a being behind this consciousness. Of course, there is consciousness. No one can deny that. But is there a being behind it, or is it a thing or a substance? Sri Aurobindo likes to quote the Vedas and the Upanishads that there's an active force and a passive force, yeah? Prakriti and Purusha. Out of this play, something emerges, a phenomenon, which we can call ignorance. And here we are back at the beginning of the book, at Sat Chit Ananda. And Chit, Sri Aurobindo translates as force. So for him it's a force, more than a being or substance. A consciousness force, or force consciousness. But consciousness alone does not make a world. Ignorance does. Unfortunately, the illusion of separation is necessary for the whole shebang to work. And the path to enlightenment is to unravel this miracle and see that in the end it's all a game, an illusion, which doesn't make matter unreal. It's only an aspect. It's not the whole cake. Okay, more about that in the next video. Thank you for liking and subscribing and joining me on Patreon, and thank you for all my Patreons like Gabriel, Sarah, Eric, Alan, Sam, Patrick, Brittany, Chris, Enda, Raghu, Robert, Brian, Björn, Mark, Patricia, Kelly, Goshen, Gregory, Alex, Tyler, Marcus, Thomas, Alex, Matthias, Kerry, Daniel, Gabriel, Kim, Robina, Tamash, Chris, Andre, Ofi, Sayan, Bob, and Feike. Thank you very much.